The moment happened at a pharmacy counter, which was not a place where Daniel had expected to feel ashamed of himself. His father had been trying to explain something to the pharmacist, something about the insurance, a card that wasn't reading, a discrepancy in the system that needed sorting, and the explanation had gotten tangled in the way his father's explanations got tangled lately, circling, adding context that wasn't requested, losing the thread and finding it again and losing it once more. The pharmacist was patient. The line behind them was not long, but was present. Daniel had put his hand on his father's arm and said, more sharply than he meant to, "Dad, just give her the card." His father had stopped mid-sentence. He'd looked at Daniel, then back at the pharmacist, and handed over the card. He didn't say anything. He looked at the counter while the pharmacist resolved it in about 45 seconds, which was the amount of time it would have taken anyway. On the way to the car, his father said, "I know I'm slow." Daniel said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "It's all right." His father said it in the tone of a man for whom "it's all right" means neither agreement nor absolution, just a door being closed quietly. They drove home without talking much. His name was Daniel. He was 51 years old. His father, Arthur, was 79 and had been living alone since Daniel's mother had died 5 years ago and was managing adequately, that was the word Daniel used in his head, adequately, though adequately required more assistance than it used to, and the assistance was more difficult to give than Daniel had expected. Not the logistics of it. He could manage the logistics. Driving to appointments, helping with the bills twice a month, the occasional Saturday that was just general maintenance of things that had accumulated. He was organized, and he'd built the time for it into his schedule the way he built other things in, and it got done. What he hadn't expected was the impatience. He'd known his father as a specific kind of man, deliberate, capable, not given to error. Arthur had run a small heating and cooling business for 30 years with the competence of someone who treated every job as a reflection of character. He fixed things. He knew how things worked. He could look at a system, any kind of system, mechanical or logistical or social, and see where the problem was and address it without drama. This was the father Daniel had grown up with, the one who could do things. The current Arthur was a different calibration of the same person. He still knew how things worked in the abstract. The knowledge was there. But the execution was slower, the short-term memory less reliable. The navigation of novel situations, a new insurance system, an updated phone, a checkout process that had changed, more difficult than it used to be. Daniel found this, in ways he hadn't admitted clearly even to himself, embarrassing. Not always, not every visit, but in public, when there was someone else watching, when the thing that was taking too long in front of a pharmacist or a clerk or a stranger in a parking lot. In those moments, he felt something that wasn't patience. He'd told himself it was about efficiency. He'd told himself he was trying to protect his father from the frustration of the moment. He'd told himself a number of things. After the pharmacy, he sat in his car in his own driveway for a while before going inside. His father had said, "I know I'm slow." The way he'd said it. Not self-pitying, not asking for reassurance, just stating it. The flat acknowledgement of a man who has noticed what he's become and has arrived at a place of unsentimental acceptance that his son had not reached. Daniel went inside and poured himself a drink and didn't drink it, just held it. He thought about the look on his father's face at the counter, the stopping, the looking at the counter. He thought about the car ride home and his father looking out the passenger window, which Arthur had never done. He'd always engaged, always had something to say, always been a presence in a car, rather than a passenger in it. He'd made his father feel like a passenger. He called his sister, Ellen, who lived in Pittsburgh and therefore had the particular relationship with this situation of someone who wasn't there for the day-to-day, but felt the weight of it from a distance. He told her about the pharmacy. She was quiet. "It's not the first time," she said finally. "I know." I've heard you do it on the phone with him, the Impatience. I know, he said again. He doesn't say anything about it, Ellen said. He never will, you know that. Yeah. So it's on you to figure out. She said it without cruelty, which was how she said most things. What's the actual problem? Because it's not really about the pharmacy. He looked at the undrunk drink. I don't know, he said. He did know, partly. He'd been not looking at it for a while. The thing about watching Arthur become slower and more confused in small moments was that it implied a direction. It implied where things were going. Every fumbled card and lost word and repeated question was data about a trajectory. And Daniel was 51, and the trajectory pointed at him too, eventually. And somewhere in his irritation at his father was the specific terror of a man who doesn't want to see himself in what he's looking at. He hadn't wanted to say this because it sounded like self-pity, and more practically because it meant the impatience wasn't about his father at all. It was about himself, which was worse. He went back to see his father the following Saturday, which was not unusual. He went most Saturdays, but he went differently. He went without a list of things to accomplish. He went just to be there. Arthur was in the garage when he arrived, not doing anything that required doing, just being in the garage, which he'd always been. The garage was the organized repository of Arthur's working life. Tools hung in their places, a logic to everything that required knowing to understand. He'd built the logic over 30 years, and he still maintained it, which Daniel noticed as its own kind of evidence. Hey, Daniel said. Hey. Arthur looked up. I wasn't expecting you until later. I came early. He looked around the garage. What are you doing? Just looking. His father said it without embarrassment. I like being in here. Daniel stood in the garage with his father and looked at the tools. He knew most of them by function, if not by name. He'd grown up watching his father use them, had occasionally handed one over when asked, had absorbed a certain amount of knowledge about how things worked from standing in this same room at various ages. Can you show me something? He said. Arthur looked at him. Show you what? Anything. Something I should know. His father looked at the workbench. Something changed in his posture. Something that was difficult to name but had to do with being asked. He spent an hour showing Daniel things. How a particular tool worked. The right way to approach a specific kind of repair. The logic of maintaining something so it lasted. He was clear when he talked about this, not tangled. The knowledge was there, and the language for it was there, and he moved through the hour with the ease of someone in their element. Daniel had forgotten, or had let himself forget, that his father had an element. They had lunch. Arthur made it, which Daniel let him do without hovering, which required effort, which he made. Sandwiches and soup from a can. Nothing complicated, but made with the particular care of someone who still takes the making of a meal seriously. At the table, Arthur said, I know I'm not what I was. Daniel looked at him. I noticed things slipping, Arthur said. He said it calmly, the way he'd said, I know I'm slow. Not asking for comfort, just establishing something. I try to stay on top of it. I don't always manage. You manage more than you give yourself credit for, Daniel said. His father looked at him. Don't. I'm not. Daniel held his father's look. I mean it literally. The garage. The way you just spent an hour explaining things to me without losing the thread. The fact that you still know where every tool is. He paused. You're different than you were. But you're not what I've been acting like you are. Arthur was quiet for a moment. The pharmacy was bad, Daniel said. It was a rough day. I was rough, Daniel said. Not you. His father looked at his soup. They didn't continue this thread. Arthur moved to something else, which was how he handled things, received them, filed them, moved on. And Daniel let him, because that was how his father did it, and it had always been how his father did it, and Daniel was not, it turned out, in a position to ask for something different. On the drive home, he thought about his father in the pharmacy and his father in the garage, and the difference between the two versions and what it meant that both were the same man. Here's the thing about the people we grew up thinking were invulnerable. They were never invulnerable. We just didn't see the places where they held. Stay with this story, because there's a part coming that reframes everything. And subscribe if this is where you come for stories that stay with you. He got a call in October from a man named Walter. Walter was in his early 80s, had been his father's friend since they were both young men working in the trades, and called Daniel because he'd run into Arthur at the hardware store, and Arthur had mentioned Daniel's name, and Walter had been meaning for years to say something. "Your father probably never told you about 79, Walter said. He had the voice of a man who was used to being listened to, and knew it, and didn't abuse it. 79, Daniel said. He would have been 8. That was the year your father had the business trouble, Walter said. I don't know how much you knew. Daniel hadn't known anything. Not much, he said carefully. The company he'd been doing subcontracting for went under, Walter said. Took a lot of smaller outfits with it. Your father was owed almost a year's worth of work, payments that never came. He paused. He had employees at the time, a few guys depending on him. He paid them out of personal money while he figured out what to do. Daniel was quiet. He didn't tell your mother the full amount, Walter said. He didn't want her to worry. He worked 2 jobs for about 14 months, nights at a facility outside of town. I won't say what kind, it's not relevant. The point is, he worked until he'd covered what he owed people and rebuilt enough to go forward. He paused. Never talked about it. Not to anyone, really. I only knew because he needed someone to know, and I was there. Daniel held the phone. I'm not telling you this to... I don't know exactly why I'm telling you, Walter said. I think because I see Arthur sometimes, and I see how he is now, and I want someone in his family to know what he was. He paused. Not that it changes anything, but it's his history, and it should live somewhere. After the call, Daniel sat for a long time. He thought about being 8 years old in 1979 and not knowing. He thought about his father working nights somewhere he'd never mentioned, in the years that Daniel remembered as just years, ordinary childhood years. Not easy, but not obviously hard, the regular texture of a life. His father had carried that alone, had decided that the weight was his to carry, had paid people what they were owed out of his own diminished savings, had worked until the arithmetic was fixed, had not told his wife the full amount, had never told his son. Daniel thought about what that kind of strength looked like from the inside. The decision to absorb something rather than let it scatter onto the people around you. The long months of it. The not saying. He thought about his father at a pharmacy counter trying to explain something, losing the thread. He thought about the pharmacist's patience and his own impatience and the particular arithmetic of what he owed his father and what he'd been giving him. He went back the following Saturday. Arthur was watching something when Daniel arrived. He looked up, settled the remote, began to get up, and Daniel said, "Stay there, I'll make the coffee." He made the coffee in his father's kitchen, which he knew from years of Saturdays, and brought it to the living room and sat down. They watched the program that had been on, a nature documentary of some kind. Arthur made a few observations about it with the easy knowledge of a man who had read things his whole life and retained them. At the commercial, Daniel said, "I talked to Walter Hennessy last week." His father looked at him. "He told me about 79, Daniel said. A pause. A long one. "He shouldn't have," Arthur said. Not angry, just the instinct. "I'm glad he did. It was a long time ago." "I know." Daniel looked at his coffee cup. "I didn't know what you carried then. I was 8. I couldn't have known." He paused. "But I know now, and I want you to know that I know." Arthur looked at the television, which was advertising something neither of them needed. "You paid the men first," Daniel said. "They had families." "I know. That's what I mean." His father was quiet for a while. The commercial ended. The documentary resumed. "You didn't have to know," Arthur said finally. "That was the point." "I understand," Daniel said, "but I'm glad I know now." He looked at his father, at the profile of him, the jawline and the hands, the man who had been many things Daniel hadn't seen. "I've been impatient with you. I'm going to be better at that." Arthur looked at him briefly. "You're fine." "I'm not always fine," Daniel said. "I'm going to be better." His father made a small sound that was not exactly dismissal and not exactly acceptance, the specific sound of a man who doesn't know how to receive this kind of attention and has decided to let it pass without incident, which was its own form of grace. They watched the documentary. Daniel drove his father to a different pharmacy the following week. The insurance situation from before had required a switch, and there was a moment at the counter where Arthur was confused about the new system, the different process, and he started to explain, and the explanation tangled. Daniel waited. He did not put his hand on his father's arm. He did not redirect. He stood beside his father and let him work through it, which took about 2 minutes, during which the pharmacist was patient and Daniel was patient, and Arthur found the thread and finished. "Thank you," Arthur said to the pharmacist. "No problem," she said. They walked to the car. Arthur walked at his pace, which was his pace, and Daniel walked beside him. "New system," Arthur said. "I'll know it next time." "Yeah," Daniel said. "You'll have it." They got in the car. Daniel drove and his father looked out the window at the November streets, and the silence between them was a different kind from the one after the pharmacy in September. Not the silence of a door closed, just the quiet of two people who have somewhere to go and are going there. He thought about Walter's call. He thought about 1979 and his father working nights and paying the men first and not telling his wife the full amount, the enormous, silent effort of it. He thought about the kind of strength that was invisible, specifically because it didn't ask to be seen. He glanced at his father. Arthur was looking at a building going past the window, something he'd noticed, something that had caught his attention. He had that expression, the one that meant he was interested in something, that the mind behind the eyes was still moving, still collecting. Daniel watched the road. He thought, "I've been measuring him by what he can't do anymore. I should have been measuring him by what he did." He thought about what he'd do with the time they had left, not manage it, not organize it into efficient Saturdays with accomplished lists, just be in it. Let his father be what his father was now, which was not nothing, which was a man who spent an hour in a garage showing his son things and was clear when he talked about what he knew. Arthur said, "Nice day." "Yeah," Daniel said. "Good day." He meant it. They had lunch after the pharmacy, a diner his father liked that he'd been going to since before Daniel was born. His father ordered what he always ordered. He didn't consult the menu. The waitress knew his name. Daniel sat across from him and looked at his father and thought about the length of a life. 30 years of a business. The men he'd paid first. The nights he'd worked and not spoken of. The tools in the garage still hanging in their places. The waitress brought the food. "How is it?" Daniel asked. "Good," his father said. He meant it. He was eating with the uncomplicated enjoyment of a man who has had a decent morning and is having a decent lunch. Daniel ate his food. He thought, there it is. Not the strength from before, not the version he'd built his idea of his father around, but something. The ease of a man in his own life, in a diner that knows his name, ordering what he always orders. Dignity was not the same as capability. He'd been confusing them. His father was not less dignified than he had been. He was differently dignified, the kind that had gotten quiet, that no longer needed to demonstrate anything, that sat in a diner and ate its lunch and was simply itself. Daniel was going to learn to see it. He drove home after lunch and sat in his car for a minute, the engine off, the November quiet. He thought about a Saturday the following month. He was going to go earlier. He was going to ask his father to teach him something else from the garage, something he should know, something that should travel to the next generation, because that was what knowledge was for. He was going to let it take as long as it took. He went inside and called his sister. "Better Saturday," he said when she picked up. "Yeah?" Ellen said. "Tell you later." He paused. "Just better." She said she was glad. He said he was too. They talked for a while about their father, about the things Walter had said, about 1979, which Ellen also hadn't known. And they sat on their respective phones in their respective cities and held the new information about the man they'd thought they knew. It didn't make the pharmacy moment disappear. Daniel wasn't trying to make it disappear. He was trying to make the next moment different. He thought about his father paying the men first. He thought, "I'll try to be that kind of person." He was 51 years old. He had time to practice. If this story made you think of someone, a person whose strength you didn't know about, or a person you've been measuring by the wrong things, leave a word in the comments. And take care of yourselves.